We are told a simple story about wealth. The more talented you are, the more you get. The more you get, the higher you rise. But for most of human history, humans lived by a completely different rule. But anthropologists found something surprising. They'll give you a fact that goes against everything you'd expect. For 99% of human history, there was no such thing as long-term wealth. Not because people didn't want it, because human groups had ways to prevent it. Anthropologist Richard Lee documented a custom among the Sand people in the Kalahari Desert: insulting the meat. A hunter carries a big kill back to camp. Nobody cheers. Instead, people stare at the animal and say, "This is pitifully thin. Where did you dig up this pile of bones?" Lee thought at first this was just modesty, just politeness, until an old hunter told him the truth. When a young man kills too much, he starts thinking he's the chief, thinking the rest of us are his servants, so we refuse to admit it. Ever. This isn't politeness, this is prevention. Anthropologists studied hundreds of these records. A pattern appeared. Many hunter-gatherer societies developed similar mechanisms, built to stop anyone from turning resources into lasting power. The methods ranged from mockery to public shame to isolation to exile. Among the Inuit, among some Aboriginal groups in Australia, a group of ordinary people pulling one person back before he rises too high. Anthropologists even have a name for it: reverse dominance hierarchy. For most of human history, humans were cautious about extreme wealth. In a tribe of a few dozen people sharing the same hunting ground, if one person hoarded resources, someone else might starve. Wealth wasn't glory. Wealth was a warning sign. This system ran for about 100,000 years. Then agriculture showed up. Before that, wealth had a problem. You couldn't keep it. Food rotted. Meat spoiled, tools broke. Even if you managed to gather more than everyone else, time would eventually take it away. Agriculture changed that. Now wealth could survive the season. Then it could survive the year. Eventually, it could survive the person who created it. For the first time, power no longer depended entirely on what you could do yourself. It could be stored, passed down, expanded. A successful hunter could impress a tribe. A successful landowner could shape the future of generations. Archaeologists digging up the Varna necropolis in Bulgaria found the earliest proof of this. That burial ground is about 6,600 years old. Most of the graves are almost empty, but grave number 43 is different. Over 1,000 gold objects buried with him. One of the largest gold discoveries from the ancient world. Archaeologists call him Europe's first millionaire. The moment wealth could outgrow personal ability and turn into long-term influence, people started looking for new ways to keep power from piling up. The Athenians gave the most direct version of this. 5th century BC, Athens set up a voting system called Ostracism. Once a year, every citizen could write down the name of someone they thought had become too dangerous for the city. They scratched the name onto a pottery shard. Whoever got the most votes didn't need to have committed a crime. Just being too prominent, too rich, too powerful. That was enough to get you exiled for 10 years. When the famous Athenian general Aristides was being ostracized, an illiterate citizen who didn't recognize him asked for help writing the name Aristides on his shard. Aristides asked him, "Did this man wrong you?" The man said, "No, I don't even know him. I'm just sick of everyone calling him the Just." And that's the strange part. Aristides wasn't accused of breaking the law. People simply felt he'd become too admired, too far above everyone else. Sometimes standing out was enough, not because people always hated successful individuals. Because once someone seemed impossible to question, the group started to feel less safe. But as societies grew bigger, humans ran into a problem. You can't exile every single person who stands out too much. So the restrictions stopped targeting individuals. They started getting written into the rules themselves. 215 BC, Rome passed the Lex Oppia. It banned women from wearing more than half an ounce of gold, banned colorful clothing, banned riding into the city in a carriage. The reasoning was written down plainly: to stop wealth from being flaunted, from stirring up unrest. Almost every country and laws that controlled who could wear certain clothes and display certain wealth. Only nobles could wear fur. No matter how rich a merchant was, he still couldn't wear certain colors. Wealth itself was never the crime. Letting other people see your wealth, that was. But rules have limits. They only work as long as enough people believe the system is still fair. Once wealth and influence keep concentrating anyway, old restraints start losing their force. What began as social pressure slowly turns into open confrontation. And when these mild restrictions couldn't stop power from piling up any further, the reaction got a lot more violent. 1381. The Peasants' Revolt breaks out in England. The rebels get into London. And the first thing they do isn't looting. They hunt down tax collectors and moneylenders, burn their ledgers in public. The priest leading them, John Ball, left behind a line that's been quoted ever since. When Adam delved in Eve's span, who was then the gentleman? A century and a half later, the German Peasants' War breaks out, bigger this time. The rebels' first targets are always monasteries and lords' granaries, the places where wealth was piled up the highest, the most visible. From the sand mocking an antelope, to the Athenians exiling a hero, to peasants burning a ledger. 8,000 years and the form kept changing, but the logic underneath barely changed at all. When one person's resources and influence get too far ahead of everyone around them, an alarm goes off inside the group. You might think that alarm has gone quiet by now. After all, we live in a time that openly celebrates success. The richest people end up on magazine covers. Their stories get turned into movies. Their names become symbols of success. But something strange happens. When you look at that kind of extreme wealth, your reaction isn't simple. You stare at it, and your reaction splits. Admiration mixed with unease. The urge to copy them, fighting against a gut-level suspicion. Why does one person get to have this much? This tension isn't something that only shows up in modern life. We usually call it resentment toward the rich. But that explanation might be too simple. It assumes the feeling is just jealousy. Evolution left us with something more complicated. For most of human history, resources were limited. If one person had wealth, that usually meant he had more food, more tools, and more power over other people. In a group of a few dozen, if someone piled up way more than he needed, that wasn't just wealth. It could also mean power was starting to concentrate. So humans developed a deep instinct. Watch out for any advantage that can't be held in check. Not because humans hate success. Humans want success too. Our ancestors wanted more resources, higher status, to be seen as more valuable. The problem was never wealth itself. The problem was what wealth could become, when wealth begins to shape other people's choices. And that's why the human brain has always run two programs that seem to contradict each other. The first program tells you, study them. Get more resources. Be a winner. The second program warns you, watch out. Don't let anyone's advantage turn into a force nobody can challenge. These two programs don't actually conflict. They serve the same goal. Let the individual get a chance while keeping the group in balance. In the past, when that balance broke, humans responded directly. Mockery, exile, rebellion, burning the records that symbolize power. But the modern world changed how that feedback works. Today, there's a new gap between feeling something and doing something about it. Your frustration can go online. You can be angry behind an anonymous profile picture. You can talk about wealth, power, unfairness. Then close your phone and keep living your life. A few thousand years ago, that feeling might have led somewhere. Your anger would be visible. The people around you would see it. They might share it. They might act on it together. Today, the experience is different. The emotion still appears, but most of the time, it ends as information. A comment, a post, something measured, recorded, and quickly replaced by the next thing on your screen. The signal is still there, but it now moves through a world built to absorb signals endlessly. Modern people aren't colder than our ancestors. Ancient people weren't more fair. The world simply changed faster than evolution ever could. 10,000 years ago, the human brain was shaped inside small groups. It knew a few dozen people. It knew limited resources. It knew that one person's power could directly affect the whole group. But today, we're facing a global economy, digital networks, social systems on a massive scale. Our environment has changed. But that old alarm system is still running inside us. It still sends the same signal. Be careful when too much power gathers in one place. Except this time, it's facing a world it was never built to understand.